இது இது போயிடுச்சுல. So good evening, friends. I hope you people are having a good weekend. And as I said in the early lectures, that we will have continuous or to any net aspirants, particularly preparing for UGC net or set examinations. This area has to be focused upon very, very clearly with much more clarity. The purpose why modern Indian history has been chosen in prior to the ancient and medieval Indian history is that modern Indian history is comparatively easier than other two areas. Okay, particularly when it comes to the British period. First of all, Indian history has been divided into three. Most of us will have such doubt why Indian history has been divided into three parts. Okay, the very simple reason is that just to avoid or to make things clear, we need to some bifurcation we need, right? So James Mill in 1829 in his book has been clearly pointed that he mentioned about three important areas: the ancient, the medieval, and the modern. Okay, there are three important areas in history: the ancient, medieval, and modern. And then he also stated that ancient India is also known as medieval, the Hindu India, and the medieval as the Muslim India, and then the modern as the British India, not as Christian India. Okay, so that's something very irrelevant. But anyway, it is just 1829, so it's very early for us, for James Mill particularly, to judge upon the things. Okay, so let us clearly brush upon the topic which we discussed in the last lecture, that is the geographical discoveries of 15th and 16th century. For few, obviously, I too need to justify and to respect the regional audience. I am also going to focus upon the vernacular. Okay, like the lecture, mostly it will be on English, but sometimes since I need to respect my vernacular people, I will float upon to Tamil also. It will be bilingual. So, இன்னைக்கு நம்ம பார்க்க போறது என்னன்னா the advent of Europeans. Okay, it's just a continuation of the topic which we discussed in the previous lecture. Okay, about the geographical discoveries of 15th and 16th century. So the geographical discoveries of 15th and 16th century, as we mentioned in the last class, is an important epoch in the history of modern India or modern world, right? So in 1453, after the fall of Constantinople, their route was blocked by the Turks, Ottoman Turks, from Europe to Asia. And it was substantiated with the discovery of new sea routes led by Prince Henry, the navigator of Portugal. He was the king of Portugal, and he started the marine school, and so many new continents were discovered. All right, but let us come to our business. Okay, in 1498, Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese traveler, discovered India to the west. And then he was a Portuguese. After his arrival, the Indians, the natives, they treated the foreigners with due respect and dignity. And then in 1500s, we could see the Portuguese establishing their settlements in different parts of India, particularly in the western coast, in present-day Kerala, in the areas of Cochin, Calcutta. Okay, so these were the places, Calicut, these were the places they established. Okay, so now we will focus upon in detail how the Europeans they entered into India. Okay, and what where they did and who were them and why they do come and what happened actually. Okay, so let's go into the main topic. Okay, so yeah. So India's trade relations with Europe can be traced back to the ancient days of the Greeks. It is also important to note that India's relations with the Europeans is not so modern. Okay, as we discussed the topic, it's not modern. Even during the ancient times, we do had good trade relations. Particularly when you take the case of Tamil Nadu, in a place called Arikamedu near Pondicherry, we have a beautiful place called Arikamedu near the beautiful city of Pondicherry, where in recent years few Roman jars, the amphora jars of Romans, and the Roman coins were excavated by the archaeologists. That is the evidence that during the Sangam age, particularly in the early years of Christian era, there existed trade relationship between Tamils, that is Indians, and the West from Rome. Okay, so the Italians and Indians, they had trade relationships even in the early years of Christian era, that is in the ancient time period. But when it comes to the medieval ages, that is the Middle Ages in India, it's known as medieval period, but in the West, it's known as the Middle Ages. Okay, trade between Europe and India and Southeast Asia was carried on along several routes. Okay, so there were multiple routes. Okay, there was not only one route, there was a multiple route before the advent of the geographical discoveries in the 15th century. There were some other routes also. Okay, there were three routes, and the primary route, okay, the primary route through which the Europeans, here when we talk about Europeans, it's not the Spanish or the Portuguese or the English or the Danes or the French. It's all about the Italians. But we need to also understand, where was Italy before 1871? See, there was no Italy before 1871. Italy, as a modern state, was formed only in the year 1871 when King Victor Emmanuel coronated as the king of the kingdom of Italy, northern Italy. Okay, but before then, it was only the Italian states. Okay, so there were dotted Italian states. Okay, like the Sicily, Naples, Lombardy, Venice, Milan, Florence, Genova. All these were the Italian states. They had a the language Italian or the old Latin. Okay, and the primary route, okay, through which the Italians they enjoyed trade with India was by sea along the Persian Gulf, and from there overland through Iraq and Turkey, and then again by sea to Venice and Genoa. So this is the returning route from India. From the east, they returned through this route. So it's through Persian Gulf, the first route through which the Italians they enjoyed trade, they conducted trade with India was through Persian Gulf, and then through Iraq and Turkey. All right, in the northern part of the Asia. All right, and the second was not so used very commonly. Okay, but still it was under use. It's through Red Sea. Okay, it's through Red Sea along the Red Sea, then overland to Alexandria. Okay, then overland to Alexandria. That's in the northern part of the Africa. Egypt is the northern part of Africa, and Alexandria is one of the important cities in Egypt. When let's first see how it's all started. Okay, after Alexander's invasion, okay, in the 4th century BC, Alexander appointed his general Ptolemy. Okay, and Ptolemy, after the death of Alexander in Macedonia, and he coronated himself as the ruler of Egypt, and he started his own dynasty called Ptolemaic dynasty, and he also built a city, beautiful city in Egypt called near Cairo called Alexandria. It is also very important to note here that world's first modern library was built in Alexandria by Ptolemy. Okay, so the second route to India used by Italians was through Alexandria. Okay, and from then by sea to Venice and Genova. Okay, it's also like from Red Sea, from India, they went to Red Sea, then they crossed Alexandria, and then again they used the Mediterranean to reach the Venice and Genova. The third route through which the Italians they conducted trade with Indians was not frequently used, less frequently used overland route lay through the passes of the northwest frontier of India, across the Central Asia and Russia to the Baltic. Okay, this route passed through the passes of India, the Khyber and the Bolan Pass. Okay, so the Italians they passed the passes, they crossed the passes, they went to Russia and then to the Baltic, and then they reached the Italian states. Okay, in all these were the three important routes through which Italians from Venice, Genova, Milan they conducted trade with India. Okay, is it clear? And my dear friends, if you have any such doubts, okay, kindly drop your doubts in the comment box. Okay, since it is the YouTube live, Okay, the history office is presenting YouTube live. Obviously, there can't be any kind of voice doubts. So it is better if you have any doubts, please put your doubt, okay, in the comment box. Okay, so we will proceed, okay, further. Okay, let's see whether people are joining further. Okay. Okay, so let's move upon. So this is the introduction. Okay, let's see how they came further. How the Europeans they came further. Okay, the primary route, however, used by them was through the Persian Gulf. Okay, and then overland through Iraq and Turkey, and then again by sea to Venice and Genoa. This was the primary route. However, okay, let's see who are the people who dominated trade in India. Okay, in the East. Here when we take the case of East Indies, it's not referring to only India. Most of us confuse that when we take the case of East India Company, it's only referring to India. It's not India actually there. At the time, the term East India refers to the cities and the region located exactly opposite to West Indies. Okay, that's almost the entire region from situated in the Pacific and Indian Ocean was East Indies. Okay, so the Asian part of the trade was carried on mostly by the Arab merchants and the sailors, while the Mediterranean and the European part was the virtual monopoly of the Italians. So, when you take the case of the indigenous traders, even in the East, okay, even in the East Indies, we too had a few indigenous traders, particularly the best among them were the Arabs. So, before the advent of Turks, so Turks gained prominent only in the 14th and 15th century. But before them, it was the Arabs. Okay, Arabs played a very significant role. They dominated the Indian trade, particularly trade with western part of India, particularly in present day Kerala, okay, it was dominated by the trade with Kerala was dominated by the Arab merchants, all right, and the sailors. And then the Mediterranean part and the European part of Indian trade was the virtual monopoly of the Italians. As I said in the last slide, the Italians from Genova, from various city-states of Italy, was dominated by the Italians. Okay, so goods from Asia to Europe passed through many states and many hands. Every state they levied tolls and duties, while every merchants they made a substantial profit. So the merchants they need to pay taxes and duties everywhere, which made the product or the commodity too costly. Like how Apple phone in India, it's too costly. Okay, because we are paying much custom duties and high level of taxes. But the Apple phone, the same price of Apple i12 or i13 would be much lesser in US or other states in the West. All right. So there were many other obstacles such as the pirates and the natural calamities on the way. Yet the trade remained highly profitable. So we also need to believe that piracy was an important threat. Okay, for trade. Like there would be some unknown people. Like in India, during the medieval time, we had this community or a group called the Pindaris. Okay, these people were the looters. But in 1817, Lord Hastings put an end to them. Okay, during the course of the Third Anglo-Maratha War, Pindaris were destroyed and they were defeated. Okay, they were the people who lived during the medieval time. Okay, exactly in the in the central part of India. Okay, so they were one of the best examples of pirates. So the pirates were the looters. So sometimes, while the Europeans they carry on the commodities in the ships, the pirates they used to get it. Okay, they used to burgle it, and the natural calamities like since these commodities were transmitted through ships, some of the natural calamities are unavoidable, like the cyclones or anything. So all these threats, amidst all these threats, the trade between India, then India, and the West remained highly profitable. And this was mostly due to the pressing demand of the people of Europe for Eastern spices, which fetched high prices in European market. And it's very, very important to note here that Indian spices available in East Indies, okay, in Asia, are highly valuable. For example, if you take the case of pepper, pepper is costly even today. Okay, it's almost cost some 1,200 rupees even today, 1 kg of pepper. But we don't give much importance to it. Okay, like when we are taking any pongal or anything, we used to take it and throw it out. But it has its high medicinal value. Okay, even during COVID time period, COVID lockdown, doctors they prescribed to use the pepper. Okay, to a greater extent, it has high medicinal value, pepper, cardamom, and other spices. So people who live in the west, since the climate there is more spread than tropic. Okay, we are in a tropic zone, so we enjoy moderate climate. But there, the climate is of too extreme. If it is cold, means the cold would be very high. For them, it is necessary to have some kind of spicy foods, like dotted with spices like pepper. Okay, so the demand for spices like pepper is very high in Europe, even in the 14th and 15th century, even today also. Okay, so this demand, okay, pressed for the high exchange of products from east to the west. All right. So the Europeans they needed spices because they lived on the salted and peppered meat during the winter months when there was a little grass to feed the cattle and only a liberal use of spices could make this meat palatable. Okay, so they need meat anyway to live a life, positive life, to live a calm life during the winter, they need a meat. So to make the meat special, they need the spice, okay, spices like pepper and others, okay, so that they could make it a spice. Unfortunately, during the winter times, it is very hard to cultivate them. So they are in need of spices, and that need was capitulated by the people in India. Okay, like even if you watch the movie called Urumi, okay, that's a famous Malayalam movie called Urumi, where we could see how people they are using like Indians, how they used to throw the spices, okay, to the Europeans, and they used to get gifts from them. Okay, this is how people they treated the foreigners. Okay, so the foreigners were treated with greed. Okay, with the Indians in the early times. All right, that we need to acknowledge and we need to respect. Okay, so let's move further. So the old trading routes between the east and the west came under the Turkish control after the fall of Ottoman Empire. After the fall of Constantinople, make a pardon, after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, that we could see how the Ottoman Turks they controlled the trade after capturing Byzantine Empire. Okay, they controlled the trade. Okay, between Europe and India, and moreover, the merchants of Venice and Genova, they monopolized the trade between Europe and Asia. In European side, it was dominated by the Italians, and they refused to let the new emerging city-states of Western Europe, particularly Spain and Portugal, have any share in the trade through these old routes. So it was a big hectic job for the growing states like Spain and Portugal to enjoy trade with India. Okay, so they were in search of new sea route. Okay, so this was the rationale behind the geographical discovery of the 15th and 16th century. See, on the one hand, in Europe itself, it was the Italy state, it was the Italians who dominating the trade. Okay, then when it comes to Asia, okay, it was the Ottoman Turks who dominates. Okay, after the fall of Constantinople, they are starting to dominate. Okay, they are controlling the trade with Asia. Then when it comes to Asia, again, okay, we have the Arabs who control the trade with India. Okay, so this is how people they were cornered. Okay, the people in Europe, particularly of the growing states like Spain and Portugal, okay, they were dominated. Hello, hello, hello. So sorry for the interruption. Um, but the trade with India and Indonesia was too highly priced by the West Europeans to be so easily given up. Okay, so they were not in the position to give up the Indian trade. Okay, so they are in the search of the new route. Okay, so sorry for the interruption. Uh, but the trade with India and Indonesia was too high. Okay, so let's see. The demand for spices was pressing, and the profits to be made in their trade was also inviting. Okay, so this was the position. So they were in need to do something. So the reputedly fabulous wealth of India was an additional attraction as there was an acute shortage of gold all over Europe, and gold was essential as a medium of exchange if trade was to grow unhampered. Okay, so India, on the other hand, okay, particularly present day India at the time was rich with all kinds of minerals. It might be the natural or it might be the food products or anything. So India had such a wonderful tradition, such a gift to have all kind of resources which the West lacked. So they were in search of something which the India had. And even we could also see travelers like Huan Song, Marco Polo, particularly the Italian traveler of the 13th century and 14th century, had written so many things about India's wealth, okay, which made India, okay, a priceful country. Okay, so the West European states and the merchants, therefore, they began to search for new and safer sea routes to India and the Spice Islands of Indonesia, then known as the East Indies. Okay, combinedly, all these areas are known as the East Indies. And as we discussed in last lecture, it was all started with person called Prince Henry the Navigator. So in the mid of 15th century, he started a school and he trained his boys, and his boys discovered the new sea routes in 1488, where Bartholomew Diaz he landed upon the southern tip of Africa. He named it as Cape of Storms because he experienced a storm there. But in 1498, it was Vasco da Gama who used that route, Cape of Storms route, and he landed upon the western coast of India, then known as Calicut. Okay, and let's discuss about the Portuguese first. The first steps were taken by Portugal. Obviously, it was the Portuguese people who were the masters. And Vasco da Gama landed upon the coast of India, western coast of India, Calicut on 20th May 1498. On 20th May 1498, note this days. On 20th May 1498, Vasco da Gama landed on the western coast of India. Okay, that's a very, very important date to be noted down. And as we discussed earlier, okay, if you have watched the movie called Urumi, he was greeted with gifts, okay, by the Zamarin of Calicut, and even he was being treated like God, okay, by because even we do have that habit today, okay, of treating the foreigners as equal to God, and some respect we used to give, but we are always forgetting that those people in the West, particularly in America and England, they always look down upon Indians inferior. Okay, hereafter. Okay, my kind advice to you people, don't give much respect to foreigners. They are also same human beings. Okay, they are also human beings like us. Treat everyone with humility and dignity and treat everyone equally. That's something which we need to understand every day. Okay, but we need to change that habit. In those days, foreigners were treated with gifts and greetings, and likewise, this gentleman Vasco da Gama was treated with gifts. As a result, he returned to Portugal. Okay, he returned to Portugal in 1499, and it is very, very important to note here that he returned with a cargo which sold for 60 times the cost of his voyage. So imagine how worthy he was, how worthy his travel was, how well he was treated. Okay, and then these and other navigational discoveries opened a new chapter in the history of the modern world. Adam Smith wrote later that the discovery of America and the Cape Route to India, discovery of America and the Cape Route to India were the two greatest and most important events recorded in the history of mankind. Please record this. This is very, very important. Adam Smith once stated that the discovery of America and the Cape Route to India were the two greatest and most important events recorded in the history of mankind. Okay. And Vasco da Gama returned to Portugal in 1499, and Pedro Alvares Cabral, okay, a fellow Portuguese, he went to Portugal. You see, this gentleman, what he did after returning to Portugal, Vasco da Gama, he praised about India. Okay, that India is rich of everything, gold, spices, everything. So it kindled the government. So the government sponsored and sent Pedro Alvares Cabral to India. He arrived in 1500, and Vasco da Gama once again made a second trip to India in 1502. Both of these gentlemen, they established Portuguese trading stations at Calicut, Cochin, and Kannanur. All these are in Kerala, okay, like in the western part of Kerala. And then the Blue water policy is attributed to Don Francis de Almeida, the first viceroy of Portuguese possessions in India. And do you know something? It was Pedro Alvares Gabriel who was the original founder. Okay, but unfortunately, he was not given the position of viceroy. It was Francis de Almeida, okay, who became the first viceroy of Portuguese settlements in India in 1505, and he introduced a policy called the Blue Water Policy. According to this policy, as per this policy, the Portuguese should be the sole trade power in the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, which means any other ships who enter into the waters of India, it might be the Arabian Sea or the Indian Ocean, they need to pay tax to the Portuguese. Okay, that's something very bad, right? But still, the Portuguese they exercised this. Later in 1509, Albuquerque Alfonso de Albuquerque was appointed as the governor of Portuguese territories in India. Okay, in 1510, uh, the Portuguese occupied Goa from the Sultan of Bijapur. Thereafter, Goa became the capital of Portuguese settlement in India. See, Goa story is something different. இப்பயும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, okay, sorry, as I said before, I will also include some bilingual terms. கோவா வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, இன்னமும் வந்து போர்ச்சுகீஸ் ஆதிக்கத்துக்கு கீழ தான் இருக்கு. சரியா? ஆனா, கோவாவோட ஹிஸ்டரி வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, 1510ல இருந்து ஆரம்பிக்குது. கோவா வந்து ஃபர்ஸ்ட் பிஜாப்பூர் சுல்தான் கிட்ட இருந்தது. அதுக்கப்புறம் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, அத வந்து போர்ச்சுகீஸ் ஆக்குபை பண்ணிட்டாங்க. சரியா? இப்ப 1947ல நம்மளுக்கு இண்டிபெண்டன்ஸ் கிடைச்ச போதும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, கோவா வந்து போர்ச்சுகீஸ் கீழ தான் இருந்தது. சரியா? ஏன்னா போர்ச்சுகீஸ் வந்து அந்த அளவுக்கு கோவா வந்து கண்ட்ரோல் பண்ணிட்டு இருந்தாங்க. ஆனா 1963ல வந்து இந்தியன் ஆர்மி வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, த்ரூ த்ரெட், ஓகே, பிகாஸ் தே த்ரெட்டன்ட் த போர்ச்சுகீஸ் அண்ட் போர்ச்சுகீஸ் தே சரண்டர்ட். ஓகே, போர்ச்சுகீஸ் வந்து இந்தியா கிட்ட கோவா கொடுத்துட்டு தே லெஃப்ட். ஆனா அவங்க வந்து கம்ப்ளீட்டா லெஃப்ட் ஆகல. இன்னமும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா அவங்களோட இந்த ஒரு ஆதிக்கம் வந்து கோவால இன்னமும் இருக்கு. சரியா? அல்பர்ட் குர்க் ஆல்சோ கேப்சர்டு மலாக்கா அண்ட் சிலோன். இவங்க என்ன பண்ணாங்கன்னா மலாக்கா சிலோனையும் கேப்சர் பண்ணாங்க. சிலோன் வந்து அந்த டைம்ல வந்து ஒரு இண்டிபெண்டன்ட் ஸ்டேட்டா இருந்துச்சு. It was captured by the Portuguese. Ceylon relationship with India வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா ரொம்ப ancient. Like even during the Ramayana time itself, the relationship between the island and India started. Okay, which is lasting even today. Right. So the Portuguese also built a fort at Calicut. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் டைம் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா போர்ச்சுகீஸ் வந்து காலிக்கட்ல ஃபோர்ட் கட்டுறாங்க. அல்பர்ட் குக் டைட் இன் 1515. அல்பர்ட் குக் பத்தின ஒரு இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங் ஸ்டோரி இருக்கு. இவர் என்ன பண்ணிருக்காருன்னா, he advised his army men, okay, his Portuguese soldiers to marry Indian women. ஏன் அப்படி பண்ணாருன்னா, to increase the Portuguese population in India. சரியா? He never asked his girls to marry Indian men, but he asked his men to marry Indian women. Okay, that's something a tricky role which he played. That's how they can able to increase the population. Okay, the successors of Albuquerque, they established Portuguese settlements at Daman, Salsette, and Bombay on the western coast, and at Santom near Madras and Hooghly in Bengal on the eastern coast. மெட்ராஸோட ஸ்டோரி வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா ரொம்ப ஒரு இம்பார்ட்டன்டான ஸ்டோரி. சரியா? So when the Portuguese arrived in Madras in 1522, okay, when they arrived in the Tamil country, they built a port and named it Santhome. சரியா? Santhome பேர் வச்சாங்க. After the Christian apostle Saint Thomas, who is believed to have preached here between the years 52 and 70 CE. இப்போ வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா செயின்ட் தாமஸ் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா இந்தியாவுக்கு வந்த மாதிரி சொல்றாங்க. ஃபர்ஸ்ட் செஞ்சுரி ஏடியில அவர் இந்தியாவுக்கு வந்ததாகவும், அவர் இந்த மயிலாப்பூர் ரீஜியன்ல வந்து ப்ரீச் பண்ணதாகவும் சொல்லப்படுது. ஸோ அவரோட ரிமெம்பரன்ஸ்ல வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா போர்ச்சுகீஸ் வந்து சின்ஸ் தே ஆர் ஸ்டான்ச் கிறிஸ்டின்ஸ், ஓகே, தே கெப்ட் த நேம் சாந்தோம். சரியா? ஸோ ஆனா, அதுக்கப்புறம் என்ன ஆகுதுன்னா, போர்ச்சுகீஸ் வந்து தமிழ்நாடுல வந்து இதுக்கப்புறம் நல்லா ஸ்ப்ரெட் பண்ண ஆரம்பிக்கிறாங்க. அவங்களோட ரிலிஜியனும் சரி, அவங்களோட எஸ்டாப்ளிஷ்மெண்ட்ஸும் சரி. Okay, it is said that in the 16th and in 17th century, Portuguese, they spread the religion. Okay, they forcefully converted many people. Okay, particularly in southern part of Tamil Nadu. As a result, over 70,000 people by 17th century, by the end of 17th century, it has been recorded in Rajensa's book. By the end of 17th century, around 70,000 people were converted to Christianity in the present day districts of Thuthukudi, Tirunelveli, and Ramanathapuram by the Portuguese. Okay. However, the Portuguese power declined in India by the end of the 16th century. They lost all their possessions except Goa, Dayu, and Daman in the next century, and they packed up and they went to their homeland. Okay. Is it clear about the Portuguese? Okay. Am I making things clear? Prized by the West Europeans to be so easily given up. Okay, so they were not in the position to give up the Indian trade. Okay, so they are in the search of the new route. Okay, so sorry for the interruption. Uh, but 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 Okay. So, in case if you have any doubts, please post your doubts in the comment section. Okay. Okay. So now let's move on to the another topic, that's the Dutch. How the Dutch they came to India and what was their intention. So before discussing about their arrival in India, okay, it's very important to note about the history of the Dutch East India Company. Okay, the Dutch East India Company, by the name of the United East India Company, or in Dutch, it's known as Verenigde Oost-Indische Company. That's VOC. Verenigde Oost-Indische Company. That's VOC. So the Dutch East India Company is famously known as VOC. It's a trading company founded in the Dutch Republic, present-day Netherlands, in 1602 to protect that state's trade in the Indian Ocean and to assist in the Dutch War of Independence from Spain. Okay, this was the motive behind the establishment of the Dutch East India Company. So the Dutch were the second people to come to India for trade. See, initially all these people they came to India just to enjoy trade. Trade was their initial motive. Okay, but later on, they engaged in politics. That's the different story for the day. So the company prospered through most of the 17th century as the instrument of the powerful Dutch commercial empire in the East Indies, that's in the present day Indonesia, and it was dissolved in 1799. Okay, so what did they do in India? What was their business in India? Okay, so the Dutch government they granted the company a trade monopoly in the waters between Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and the Straits of Magellan between Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, with the right to conclude treaties with the native princes, to build forts and maintain armed forces, and to carry on the administrative functions through officials who were required to take an oath of loyalty to the Dutch government. So Dutch East India கம்பெனிக்கு வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா டச் கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து பர்மிஷன் குடுக்குறாங்க. மோனோபோலி வந்து நீங்க என்ஜாய் பண்ணலாம். லைக் ஈஸ்ட் இண்டீஸ்ல வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா, நீங்க மோனோபோலி ட்ரேட் என்ஜாய் பண்ணலாம். உங்கள தவிர்த்துட்டு வேற எந்த டச் கம்பெனியும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா வரமாட்டாங்க. சரியா? Yeah. ஸோ டச் ஈஸ்ட் இந்தியா கம்பெனிக்கு வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா டச் கவர்மெண்ட் வந்து இந்த மோனோபோலி வந்து கொடுக்குறாங்க. சரியா? டு என்ஜாய் ட்ரேட் இன் இந்தியா வித்தவுட் எனி டிஸ்பியூட் ஃப்ரம் தி அதர் டச் கம்பெனிஸ். ஸோ அதுக்கப்புறம் வந்து முக்கியமான ஒரு பாயிண்ட் என்னன்னா, டச் அஃபீஷியல்ஸ் வந்து டச் கவர்மெண்ட்டுக்கு வந்து ஒரு ப்ராமிஸ் பண்ணணும். தே வுட் பி லாயல் டு தி டச் கவர்மெண்ட் அண்ட் வுட் ஹெல்ப் தி நெதர்லாண்ட்ஸ் இன் தேர் வார் அகெயின்ஸ்ட் ஸ்பெயின் ஃபார் இண்டிபெண்டன்ஸ். ஸோ அண்டர் த அட்மினிஸ்ட்ரேஷன் ஆஃப் தி ஃபோர்ஸ்ஃபுல் governor generals, most notably John Peterson Cohen, who ruled between 1618 and 1623 as the governor of Dutch East India Company, and Anthony van Diener, who ruled between 1636 and 1645. The company was able to defeat the British fleet and largely displace the Portuguese in the East Indies. So the main objective of the Dutch was not India actually. அவங்களோட மேஜர் ஃபோக்கஸ் வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா இட்ஸ் ஆல் த ஈஸ்ட் இண்டீஸ், தட் இஸ் இந்தோனேஷியா. இந்தோனேஷியா தான் வந்து அவங்களோட நோக்கமா இருந்துச்சு, நாட் இந்தியா. த மெயின் இன்ட்ரெஸ்ட் ஆஃப் தி டச் லே நாட் இன் இந்தியா பட் இன் இந்தோனேஷியன் ஐலாண்ட்ஸ் ஆஃப் ஜாவா, சுமத்ரா அண்ட் த ஸ்பைஸ் ஐலாண்ட்ஸ் வேர் ஸ்பைசஸ் வேர் ப்ரொடியூஸ்டு. சரியா? இன்னமும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா இந்தோனேஷியா இஸ் நோன் ஃபார் த இந்தோனேஷியன் ஆர்ச்சிபலாகோ, த டாட்டர் ஐலாண்ட்ஸ் ஆஃப் இந்தோனேஷியா இஸ் நோன் ஃபார் ஸ்பைசஸ். சரியா? ஸோ நம்ம ஊர்ல கிடைக்கிற ஸ்பைசஸ் விட அங்க கிடைக்கிற ஸ்பைசஸ் வந்து இன்னமும் நல்லா டேஸ்டியரா இருக்கும். தட்ஸ் வை த டச் பீப்புள் ஆர் சோ கன்னிங். அவங்க வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா இந்தியா கூட வேணாம் எனக்கு, கோ டு இந்தோனேஷியான்னு சொல்லிட்டு அங்க போயிட்டாங்க. தே லெஃப்ட் இந்தியா இன் த ஹேண்ட்ஸ் ஆஃப் த பிரிட்டிஷ். சரியா? ஸோ தே சூன் turned out the Portuguese from the Malay Straits and the Indonesian islands, and in 1623 defeated English attempts to establish themselves there. The English வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா ஸோ இன் 1623ல வந்து ஒரு அக்ரிமெண்ட் சைன் பண்றாங்க. சரியா? இன் 1623 the British and the Dutch they arrived in an agreement. அதாச்சும் என்னன்னா the English agreed to control the Indian subcontinent, thereby the Dutch agreed to control the Indonesia, the East Indies. So நம்மளோட இடத்த வந்து பார்த்தீங்கன்னா those two foreigners they decided to rule. All right, in 1623. It appeared the time that the Dutch had successfully seized the most important profitable part of Asian trade. They did not, however, entirely abandon the Indian trade. They also established trading depots at Surat, Bharuch, Cambay, and Ahmedabad in Gujarat, in West India, Cochin in Kerala, Nagapattinam in Madras, Masulipatnam in Andhra, Chensura in Bengal, Patna in Bihar, and Agra in Uttar Pradesh. In all these places, the Dutch East India Company had their trading settlements in India. Okay. In பட் அவங்களோட முக்கியமான கேபிட்டல் எதுனா புலிகை. சரி, ஆந்திரால இருக்கிற புலிகை தட் இஸ் பிரசன்ட் பழவேற்காடு இஸ் தேர் capital. In 1658, they also conquered Ceylon from the Portuguese. They exported indigo, raw silk, cotton textiles, saltpeter, and opium from India. Like the Portuguese, they treated the people of India cruelly and exploited them ruthlessly. சரியா? அவங்களும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா ப்ராப்பரா ட்ரீட் பண்ணல. சரியா? ஸோ இந்த 17th century they won over the Portuguese and emerged as the most dominant power in the European trade in India. சரியா? இப்போ வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா இப்போ 16th century கம்ப்ளீட்டா யார் டாமினேட் பண்ணாங்க? The Portuguese டாமினேட் பண்ணாங்க. 17th centuryல ஆல்மோஸ்ட் 17th century was the domination of both Dutch and the English. ஆனா பிரைமரி யாருன்னா டச் தான். சரியா? அட்லீஸ்ட் till 1650 it was the Dutch. சரியா? So they established a factory at Pulicat in 1612. However, in the mid 17th century, the English began to emerge as a superpower in India. So the Anglo-Dutch rivalry that lasted for about 7 decades, 70 years நடந்துச்சு. சரியா? இங்கிலீஷ்க்கும் டச்சுக்கும் வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா ரைவல்ரி வந்து 70 இயர்ஸ் நடந்துச்சு. During that period, the Dutch lost their settlements to the British one by one. அதுக்கப்புறம் கிளம்பிட்டாங்க. சரியா? So, my dear friends, I hope it could have been a better session for you people. So please do support our channel. Okay, definitely in future we would have much more detailed lectures. Okay, about the topic, the advent of Europeans. So we had discussed upon only two topics. Okay, the advent of Europeans pertaining to the Portuguese and the Dutch. In future, we will discuss about. I mean, in the next series, in the next class, okay, we will discuss about the British. Okay, if you have any doubts or if you have any suggestion, kindly do email us at thehistoryoffice@gmail.com, or you can also contact me. Okay, you can also contact me. Okay, like your teacher, Naresh. Okay, thank you so much. We will meet in the next class. Have a nice day. Goodbye.